And based on that, we're going to assume that the whole group matches the same. That's what people do with, like, statistics. There's no way they're going to ask half the world's population if they're watching the World Cup. They just take samples and then infer that to the population. But here's the question. Does the way that we gather data matter? You think so? Yeah, it definitely does. Let's go over a couple examples. How? Well, first off, let's go over different ways people can get data. These are different types of samples, and some are good and some are bad. Okay? Convenience. If you go to a convenience store, why is it called a convenience store? What does it mean to be convenient? Angelina.
Reliable, expensive, close, to your house.
So to be convenient means, and this is what I'm going to put here, it's just easy. This is when you're talking to people who are easy to access. So, do you know who's really easy for me to access? You guys! And I say, hey, OFA's doing a survey, I want to get your opinions, and I could say how many of you are jazz fans. You'd all raise your hands, right? Now, why is that maybe not the best idea? Do you guys reflect the population? What are some ways that you guys maybe are not very representative of the population of Hunter as a whole? Well, so maybe I could have an influence, but I just mean, like, for example, when I look out and I see you guys and look at the variables here, does that match the variables of everyone at Hunter? Give me some examples of how not. Go ahead, Josh. Okay, so you're in an honors level class, okay? So you're maybe a little more academically inclined, okay? That's a very good point. What else? This is an honors junior math class, right? So there's a couple of sophomores here, but for the most part, is this mainly juniors? Who is that missing? Seniors and freshmen, all right? So usually when we talk to people who are easy to access, it doesn't represent the population very well. And let's think about that too, because if OFA had said, I'm going to do a survey, and I said, hey, I want you to ask 20 people whether or not they like the Jazz, who would OFA probably ask? 20 what? Yeah, because you're by your family. But if you're a fan of the Jazz, probably are your family too. Maybe that's a family thing, right? Or maybe you'd ask your friends, and your friends usually have things in common. So you're not going to ask people who are like not your friends, and then usually that's going to be different. So convenience, we don't like. Okay, self-selected is just a fancy way of saying this is when people volunteer. Now, the best example I can give of this is when you guys, you have a phone. I would say when I look out here, the majority of you have smartphones, right? And when you have a smartphone, you can download apps. And after you've downloaded an app and use it for a little bit, it usually asks you to rate the app, right? Now, how many of you guys have ever taken the time to rate an app? I see like 2 hands. 3, you've been asked by multiple apps and you didn't rate them? Okay, so let me see if this person. Okay, I'll give it to him. So, who had a hand up? Izzy, I saw your hand first. Why did you take the time out of your day to rate an app?
So I don't do all of the apps, just like the ones that bother me.
So you give them bad reviews?
Yeah.
Because you're like, this one sucks, okay? Who else raised their hand here? Brittany, why did you take the time to rate an app? Okay, so it's kind of like she's just a nice person. I like it. Anyone, Hiram, did you? Who had a hand? I saw a hand over here. No? Okay, but going to what Izzy was saying, if you've ever looked at reviews for products on Amazon or just for apps in general, there's kind of 2 sides of it. There's a lot of 5 stars, and there's a lot of 1 stars, right? Because why would people take the time out of their day to rate something? Yeah, a significant impact either for good or for bad. So some of them, they'll be like, how did this breakfast cereal, how much did you like it? And some people are like, It changed my life. I am so much happier in the morning because of this cereal. My marriage has blossomed. It's changed my life, right? And other ones are like, this cereal killed my dog, and don't eat it, right? So the problem here is self-selected. We get people with strong opinions. When you have to have people take the time out of their day to participate, then you get those with strong opinions, okay? So, for example, the one that's most notorious for this is like radio shows, when they have people call in. If people are going to call in, what does that tell you? Yeah, they're taking time out of their day, so the thing that you're talking about is something that they feel passionate about, right? And usually we don't get the people in the middle ground. Okay, let's keep going. Systematic is where you're going to talk to every, and I'm going to put this, it looks weird, nth person. So, for example, if you see someone standing outside of a store doing like a survey, they don't always ask everyone leaving. Sometimes they count and say, I'm going to ask every seventh person. They'll wait for the seventh and ask that person. Wait for the seventh, ask that person. Now, the reason why we like that is because they don't choose. Why would it not be good for you to choose who you get to ask questions to? You think that could influence the results? How so? What does that mean?
If you have a preference, so if you're choosing, there's a reason.
And that's going to influence your results. We're going to come back to that word. Great job. Okay, now, what about this word random? I Googled random pictures, and these are 3 of my favorites that came up. And you're probably like, what on earth were those about, Solberg? These are random pictures, right? Now, in English, random means kind of bizarre or out of the ordinary. But in statistics, random means something different. What does it mean, Allie? Yeah, a simple random sample.
Randomly select.
Which means what?
I don't know how to explain it.
In a random sample, everyone has an equally likely chance of being chosen. Right? Stats 101. Psh. All right, so I was trying to find my Sticks of Destiny jar. My Sticks of Destiny is a great... Oh, it's right here. What I'll do sometimes is when I get to this, I'm like, now who can give me an example of a random sample? And I would call on people and say, and they'd be like, I don't know. And I keep doing it until someone says, what's an example of a random sample? What I'm doing right now, right? Mikkel brought up the word biased, which means you're favoring people. Is this favoritism if I'm doing it this way? Why not?
Everyone has an equal chance.
There you go. Everyone's name is on a stick. They're all being in there, and I'm not choosing the person, right? I'm just pulling out a stick at random, and then that person gets called on. So everyone has an equally likely chance of being chosen. We like that. Okay. Now we got 2 more, and these are types of random. Here's the problem. Let's say, let's go back to the OFA example and asking if people like jazz. If she were to randomly select, let's just say 20 people from Hunter, she goes through the records and randomly chooses 20. Would it still be difficult to track those people down? Yeah, because it could be any grade level, it could be distance learner, it could be an in-person learner, who knows, right? The other thing is it possible for you to do a random sample but still have the results maybe not represent everyone very well? For example, if she randomly chooses 20, does it guarantee that she's going to have 5 seniors, 5 juniors, 5 sophomores, 5 freshmen? No, it could have like more of one and less of the other. So what we'll do is we'll sometimes change our sampling method to make it so people are more equally represented. For example, in stratified, what we do is we split people into groups and then randomly select from each group. So for example, let's split students up by grade level. So I'm going to put senior, junior, sophomore, freshman. And then from each group, then we can randomly select. And we'll do the same there, and there, and there. Does that make sense? So in a stratified sample, strata is kind of like a commonality by grade or by gender or by some other variable. And we're going to split them up and then randomly choose. That way, the whiny freshmen are like, hey, you didn't choose enough of us, right? Because freshmen are whiny. Sophomores can be, but they're not always, right? Sophomores, you're a little better. Okay, now, last one, cluster sample. In a cluster sample, what we do is we split them into a mini population. Now this one, it's almost easier if I just draw you a visual here. So I'm going to actually draw a visual, okay? So let's say Hunter is split up like this. And let's just look at grade level again, okay? So let's say there's a lot of 9th graders, a good amount of 10th graders, a lot of whatever, okay? It looks like that. We have less seniors because as they get older, some of them either drop out or they like graduate early or something like that, okay? Now when I take my sample, even though I'm going to have fewer people, what my goal is that I still want to have this same thing. This is going to be easier if I do it like this. I still want the breakdown to be the same. Do you get what I'm saying? That is the yes. Hey, what the? I'm trying to like work this and it's not working. No, come on, no. Ooh, there we go. Skills. Come on. There we go. Ha! Okay, that took way too long, but you see what I did there? So when I take a cluster sample, what I do is this is like a mini population. You see how it's still like the same ratio of 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th graders? Now, this is kind of hard to do because I want you to think, okay, of all of the classes that you're currently taking, which classes have a good spread of 9th, 12th, 11th, and 12th graders? 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th graders. Do you guys have any classes that equally spread that out? What do you think, in your alley?
Drawing two.
Drawing too, so an art class. Everyone has to take art, but it's not really required at a certain grade level, right? So sometimes people take it early and sometimes people take it later. Good. Is there any other examples? Yes. Okay. Photography or graphics has a good spread of that. Anyone else have classes? Yes and then yes.
Well, sometimes seminary class can be pretty spread out.
Okay, so that's another example where they're spread out. Tau? PE?
Yep.
Great. Mikkel?
Those were both what I was gonna say.
All right, we've covered them. So, if we were trying to do a cluster sample, what we're going to do in a cluster is we're going to divide our population into mini populations. We're going to choose one of them, but then we ask everyone in that mini population. So let's go with, I like the art classes, okay? Because at least if we're looking at grade levels, we'll say that's maybe a little more representative, okay? So we split into mini populations. We're going to randomly choose one. And then we ask everyone in that group. All right, so that's kind of the difference. In a stratified, we split them into groups and randomly pick people from each group. In a cluster, we want the cluster to represent our population already. We randomly choose one of those clusters, and we ask everyone in that cluster. Okay? Alright, cool. Let's just move on. We're going to do some practice with that in just a second. But before we do, some of these methods were biased and others were not. And we already said, what does biased mean? It means that some people are overrepresented, some people are underrepresented. Let me share 2 examples, and then you'll know for sure what that means. So, there's a lot of sports teams at Hunter, right? And sometimes they get competitive and think, my sport's better than your sport, and things like that, right? Okay. So I decided as a stats teacher, I would settle this by doing a sample and collecting data on what everyone's favorite sports were, and then I could settle it once and for all. So I went and I did a sample of 36 people, said, what's the best sports program at Hunter? And the answers came back, it was 100% soccer. Every other sport not even mentioned, right? Cool. I like it. So we could say soccer, right? Whoop whoop. What do you think happened there? So, I have freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors on the soccer team. Why is it biased?
You're the soccer coach, and so you ask all of the soccer players who are also biased because they play the sport.
Yeah, right? Okay, so what does bias mean? I think a good definition here is favoritism, right? But a little more precise definition is when we over-represent, and you might have to write this somewhere else, over-represent or we under-represent people. So who was I over-representing there? And who was I under-representing? Everyone. Literally everyone else. Solberg. Okay, fine. So then, different one, but kind of the same idea. A lot of people wonder, what math class should I take when I am a senior? Like after this class, right? Because you could go into calculus, you could go into statistics, you could do 1030, 1040, 1050, 1060. You have college prep, you have pre-calculus. So again, I did a sample and I said, what is the best class to take? And the result was 100% AP Statistics. Whoop whoop. Doyle rules. Okay. Now again, why was that probably biased? Guess who I probably asked that? I went to my AP Stats students and I said, Brandon, wouldn't you agree, like my other favorite students, that AP Statistics is a much better class to prepare people for the future than other math classes?
Yes.
Why would he say yes to that? I set him up that he better say it, right? Because if he didn't, well, then it makes him look bad, right? So, does that matter? Yeah, I think so. But here's the thing, these are ridiculous examples, but do things like this happen in the real world? All the time. So that's why you've got to be careful, not only of how people are sampled, but also what questions they're asked. So, convenience sucks. Don't do a convenient sample. Self-selected, also no bueno. Anytime that you are told about a study or about something like a survey, it needs to come from random samples, because if it's not random, what is it? It's biased, okay? And bias exists. Let's clarify something. We all have our opinions. We're all biased. I am biased towards, obviously, soccer. I'm biased towards statistics, right? But the idea is, if they ask for my opinion, that's okay, but they should try to get opinions of everybody so it's as unbiased as possible. Okay, cool. Let's keep on rolling here. We're going to have some examples that we're going to go through. We're going to do some of these together and some you're going to do on your own. So let's kind of go through this just to see if you're on the same page. Is anyone here on yearbook staff? No? Alright. Well, Julie is on the yearbook staff. Okay, she wants to gather data to pick senior favorites. Do you know what senior favorites are? It's like the most likely to be abducted by a UFO, most likely to be president, most likely to be a Hollywood star, or something like that, okay? So they're trying to gather data on that. Now, let's go through this one time. Why should Julie use a sample instead of a census? What on earth is a census? Yeah. they do a census every 10 years here, right? And it takes so much time and effort. They actually just, like last year, they're like, whatever, we're not even doing it. We have a pandemic, okay? Let's just call that short. Okay, why should Julie use a sample instead of a census? What do you think? Yeah, less time, less effort. It's easy to just take a sample. And can samples reflect the population? If we sample correctly, then yes. Okay, so what kind of sampling method is she using? Julie decides to ask 100 people as they were leaving a hall. What kind of sample is this? Is that random if they're just all leaving one spot together? This is convenience because was it easy for her to get the data? Yeah, but why might that be biased? For her to just stand outside of A Hall and talk to people. Yeah, A Hall is primarily where you get athletics. So would their responses maybe differ from those as people who are leaving maybe like G Hall or H Hall or something like that? Yeah, now is it okay that different people have different opinions? Absolutely, but we're trying to get a good representative of the whole population, not just one type. Okay, so instead Julie created an online poll and sent it out to everyone. So what is this? Yeah, this is, let me hurry and finish that one. So this is, we call it self-selected, or in other words, voluntary response. And what's the problem with any time? So in this case, someone gets emailed something, they have to take the time out of their day to email back. Who's going to do that? Yeah, strong opinions. And then it also might, maybe, I think hopefully we're to the point where people are able to like access the internet at home, but maybe if there's people who didn't have that, they might get left out, and that's not cool. Okay, so then Julie's like, fine, those won't work. What if I stand outside the door at an assembly? I'm going to ask every 10th person as they leave. Systematic. Is that a better approach? Yeah, well, we could hopefully assume that everyone was at the assembly, so hopefully everyone's there. I'm going to ask every 10th. That way you're not choosing. So then she's like, all right, I'm going to go to the attendance office, or the counting office. I'm going to get a list of everyone, and then I'm going to randomly select 100 people from that list. What is that? That is random. Everyone had an equally likely chance of being chosen. Is it biased? No, because she randomly chose them. By the way, do you know your calculators have a random number generator on them? So if you're like, how would I randomly choose? Well, I could assign everyone in this room a number 1 through 24, and then I'll go on my calculator and use randint, and it chooses a number between 1 and 24. So that's how your calculator can do it. Or you can just put names on popsicle sticks. That's cool too. But the problem with this, why are random samples hard? Is because now I've picked 100 people that could literally be anyone in the school. So tracking them down is tough to do. She's like, that's too hard. So instead, I want to split them up by their grade level, choose 25 from each grade. What is this? What is that one called? Stratified. This one is not biased. And why do we like this one maybe a little bit better than a plain old random sample? Yeah, it's going to give you equal representation for each class. Because again, with random, is it possible if I'm doing a random selection of 100 students that I could end up with 50 seniors? It's possible, and then people would be like, that's not random. Well, it can be, right? Maybe it's unlikely, but it could happen. But this way guarantees equal representation. So then Julie's like, well, you know what? Everyone has to take art at some point. I'm just going to randomly choose an art class and ask everyone in it. Is that okay? What do we call that? Yeah, it's a cluster sample because hopefully it represents the whole population. We randomly choose one and ask everyone. The advantage is they're all in one spot. So I can just ask those guys. Okay, cool. So that's how you do this. What I want you to do now is kind of do some examples with your neighbor, okay? Okay, so I'm Mr. Solberg. Yep. I want to know how many hours people spend doing their homework. So I'm going to ask you guys to like go and ask 100 people, theoretically. How would you do that for each of these?